A few facts will highlight the peculiarly American problem. America truly is one of a kind. This is not entirely a good thing. But America is not different in every way. There is a lot about America that is shared with other nations. But the proposition that we explore here is that America is an anomaly among nations. The question then is, what makes America the nation that it is? Canada and the United States are similar in many ways, and yet are distinct countries. Despite many similarities, they have had very different outcomes, culturally. The United States is not the only wealthy nation, nor the only white, Christian nation, nor is it the only country with high crime rates or high levels of gun ownership. Yet it appears to face problems that, if not unique to America, are unique in the way they are manifested in America. America is, they say, a nation of immigrants. So are many other nations, at least in North America. But we have to be careful of the words we use. Words have meaning, and if we use the wrong word with the wrong meaning, we will confuse ourselves as well as everyone else. The problem in America is, first and foremost, a problem of poor analytics. Most people who look at the problem exhibit a poor choice of words. If our concepts are faulty, any analysis based on them will not present a workable solution. It is difficult, then, to fix America, if we do not know what a fixed America would look like. But then we would need to know where the line of demarcation is. What defines a broken nation and what typifies a fixed one? Is a utopia possible, and if so, how would we know it, if we saw it? We have been taught to ridicule and dismiss the idea of a utopia. But if we cannot imagine, if not create, a perfect nation, what does it mean to solve our problems? If we bring in reforms to ensure bad things never happen again, would we not eventually end up with a perfect system? It might make sense to look first at what a nation is. America is a nation, but few discussions bother to question what a nation is, or what makes a territory a nation. But it is the nation that is having these peculiarly American problems. How do we define the nature of a nation? Most people, if asked, would say America is a country, and a country is defined by the territory its government encompasses and contains, within its regulatory authority. In short, a nation is a legal entity defined and defended by the legal authority of the nation's institutions. In this understanding, it is the authority of the state exercised through its military that defines the nation. Which is another way of saying, if the military can defend the border, it is a country. In nation building, might makes right, and the end justifies the means. All of the fancy language in founding documents means nothing if one lacks the military might or will to defend one's border. But the nation as a physical territory does not disappear if it loses a war or a section of its lands, which may not even be contiguous. Some nations such as the U.S. have islands as part of its lands. But it is also true that a city-state becomes a city once a central government defeats the city governors and incorporates the city into the national government. The nation has to have legal integrity. It has to maintain its status as sovereign lawgiver. The nation is an entity with a particular political status in the community of nations. The state has less to do with physical territory than with non-material factors such as its imagery and law. Canada, for example, has existed as a territory for as long as the continent has existed. As a nation, it has existed only since the English of 1867 passed the Articles of its incorporation into law. There were no Canadians before this date. Canadians are a legal creation, not a physical substance. The native Canadians are people who were incorporated into the sovereign nation of Canada in 1867. People who came previous to this land intentionally to take up residence were settlers. Only when the nation was incorporated and borders established along with conditions for entry were there immigrants. Before this time there was no nation to immigrate to. An immigrant is a person who comes to an established country with established legal requirements for entry and the taking up of residence. The nation as a legal entity has to exist before one can immigrate to it. Right or wrong, the ones who conceive of the union create the nation. Those who come later come under the conditions laid down by the formers of the law that create the framework of the nation. The nation is a legal entity and nothing more. An immigrant looks to acquire legal status from the established legal authority of the nation. Settlers form the nation when they establish the conditions for joining in with what they have established. The formation of a nation might be considered the establishment of a social contract. The extent of the contract establishes the boundaries of the nation. Immigrants are those who come because they are in full agreement with the compact. Migrants come to the nation as displaced persons. Technically, as they are driven to the land they arrive at, they promise nothing to the inhabitants of the nations they invade. They are presumed not to have arrived intentionally or from a desire to migrate. They are, it is assumed, victims of circumstance. These observations help us set the stage for the analysis of America and its peculiar problem. America was a land of settlers and immigrants, and like other white Christian nations has been impacted by large influxes of migrants. But this change in composition has to be seen as a symptom, not the central issue. America, because of its wealth, size, and power, chose to create a republic and disengage from the British style of government. This republic was conceived of by relatively well-off white men. We can suppose the republic was designed to reflect the values and needs of the white men that designed it. As would be natural, America, the land of rugged individualism, developed the idea that a nation ought to benefit the hardworking independent entrepreneur. And for a long time, this was the sort of person America attracted. Those who needed a more sheltered existence tended to push further north to Canada. Canada was conceived of as a place dominated by law and order, in other words, a centralized state. Even in the backwoods, law and order preceded the Canadian settler. In a land the size of America with the arable land it has, a capitalist outlook seemed best. Great wealth was there for the taking. There was in fact so much to compete over, it seemed as if everyone could gain a share. But all good things come to an end, even when talking about a nation the size of America. First the free land was taken up, then the rise of the great combines of industry made it more difficult for the small shop owner to expand, and in many cases, to survive. This is not to say the advantages of the American system did not still exist. But the average, hard-working person was less likely to make a go of it than before. The new arrival could no longer start a farm, with no more than a horse, plow, and axe and gallons of sweat equity. The capital needed to start a farm was more than the average immigrant had available. But what was more significant, the rewards for making the investment were lower and the chance of survival nearly zero. Competition had measurably increased. The exceptional still had their stories of great success. This did not change, but as we go down the line, to those who are not only unexceptional but also perhaps below average, success becomes much more challenging. Many immigrants lack the skill set and capital, but also education and family connections. The new immigrants were becoming an underclass. Hard work might put food on the table and might even give the next generation some advantages, but hard work was only possible for a few decades of a person's life. The working life of the average person was not long enough to accumulate the capital needed in the industrial and developed economy of a settled America. What is worse, setbacks were more disastrous, if for no other reason than the climb back up was significantly more difficult than before. Those who lost everything set back their entire family, perhaps for generations. In the 1700s, a man would indenture himself to the owner of a commercial establishment, just to get to the New World. At the end of this period, he could set out and establish himself in his own business, with hard work and some luck. But 7 years of work in the 1900s would not accomplish anything significant. It hardly even makes sense to work hard in the modern world, as the money is in those with some kind of commercial edge. This generally requires a considerable amount of education. We can conclude that the path to success has deteriorated and has become more difficult to traverse with time. One usually needs a considerable amount of education and/or wealthy parents to give you a head start. But America is a country with a history of exceptional persons winning exceptional rewards. The millionaires and now billionaires of America are household names. To aggravate matters, America claims that anyone can occupy the highest office of the land. This suggests that the presidency could one day be held by a low IQ, unmotivated person. But even if we take this claim with a large grain of salt, it suggests that virtually everything else is open to the enterprising fellow. If we look at the presidency, however, the days when a self-reliant backwoodsman could make it to the White House is long gone. Liberals argue that slavery is the quintessential American problem. This claim needs to be considered. Blacks argue that pulled out from their cultures they are an alienated people. No doubt many feel this way. It is difficult to identify with people one fears and hates. But the facts indicate that once slavery was abolished, blacks were making inroads and accumulating wealth. Indeed, we see many exceptional persons in high office that come from all kinds of backgrounds. In some instances, a state's public offices are universally staffed by black persons. Blacks, when in a near majority or majorities, swiftly reject the narrative of diversity or equality. But the problem of race has become so polarized the resolution has become an unresolvable dilemma. If the case of Black Americans is extreme, there are few groups who did not start their American experience handicapped by discrimination and poverty. However, we ought not to dismiss the idea of alienation having impacted African Americans harder than their fellow Americans, too quickly. Whatever the reason for the different outcomes, other groups have found a space within the American landscape to a greater degree than blacks have. It would, however, be a betrayal of the American story to embrace fully the narrative of victimhood. There is a reason why few Americans do not believe that any person with hard work cannot climb their way out of victim land. There is, given the size and diversity of America and its wealth, no other country in the world that gives its citizens the opportunity for success that America gives. The potential for success exists, but the demands on the individual have increased. By the time the freed slave was given his 40 acres and a mule, the day of the self-sufficient homesteader was probably fading. America was on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. Not only was cheap land and self-sufficiency fading, but life was also getting expensive, as new products made their way onto the market. These observations have to be balanced with the fact that the average person in the United States was quite well off. One did not need to be exceptional to be a success when compared to the family living in Europe or Africa. And because incomes were relatively high and things cheap, people lived fairly well, and after the wars things really boomed. Even if a life of financial independence was beyond the majority, progress was being made towards a better life for all, and for the most part people were better off than their parents. However, as the nation industrialized and capital became more difficult to find, the myth of the independent, self-made person came head-to-head with the need for factory workers. But as opportunities in small-scale farming and artisan work declined, other doors were opening. The arrivals saw an opportunity that had nothing to do with farming or working with one's hands. This is where the issue becomes uncomfortable. The narrative of the self-made man making America is largely a myth. We were all taught that America was built by entrepreneurs. Enterprising men observed an opportunity, invested capital, and created a business. The details are not important. The argument is only made to prove that because an investor took the risk, to him belong the spoils. If the argument contained or considered all the relevant factors, it would indeed justify capitalism. As it is, the story is based on a rationalization of what is at heart, a criminal enterprise. To understand what is meant by this remark, we have to understand how nations are formed. We need to understand that if stealing a man's crops is wrong, then to claim a subcontinent is wrong, as well. There is a strong mythology attached to private property that cannot be justified by anything other than guns and physical violence. To start with, the formation of an army does not bestow those who fund the military with inalienable rights. The possession of a standing army only makes you a gang member, once removed. Whatever the need for an army, the possession of a military does not give the nation or the citizens any rights or natural legitimacy. Might does not make right. Thinking it does leads many to believe a strong military is a source of rights. But then how do you reject the idea that all rights are based on physical coercion? This rejection of an army's ability to bestow itself and its nation with rights leads us to question the right of a people to land they migrated to. But to suggest migration does not justify a land grab is not the same as saying there is no feasible way to create a nation, nor does it mean no one has a right to control the borders of a nation. Two wrongs do not make a right. The criticism of one source of ownership is not an endorsement of a different form. What is different about stealing a man's wallet from claiming a waterfall, forest, or deposit of oil as your own? The difference is that the wallet is owned by a legal entity under the protection of the state, whereas, according to the wisdom of man, the natural world has no owner until a state claims it. By virtue of the power of its military, the state claims the right to assign rights to the property under its command, to the people who fulfill the conditions of a licensee. But this argument is only valid if brute force legitimizes ownership. If you agree the state can claim any land it can defend by force, then a man taking your wallet by force is within his rights. If it is wrong to forcefully deprive a man of his wallet, it is wrong to forcefully deprive all other human beings of a natural resource. If your nation has the right to claim land by military might, other nations have the same right to deprive you of this land, because they have a stronger military. Ownership cannot be reasonably based on the fact you have access to more physical power than your competitors, unless physical power is the only form of legitimacy. If ownership of a stone cannot be legitimized by the exercise of power, we cannot legitimize any ownership of anything based on superior power. This suggests all conventional ownership models are illegitimate. Every nation and political jurisdiction are a fictitious creation. None of them have a legitimate right to exist. None would exist without armed men to defend their self-professed right to exist. This means, governments are gangsters and nothing more. The question is whether we make the use of force legal or not. Is ownership legal when those who contest the claim are killed? Alternatively, do we make the use of force as a way of legitimizing ownership illegal? It's a simple question about a simple issue. Does force result in an illegitimate claim on property, or is force able to legitimize ownership? If the latter is the option chosen, then the self-made man is a gangster and the gangster the epitome of the self-made man. The difference is that the self-made man the authorities laud is the man whose actions are justified by regulation. But this means he is not truly a self-made man. He is a government man made by his ability to live under the tutelage of a powerful state. The successful entrepreneur partners with a government with the physical power to protect and legitimize his claim. The criminal succeeds on his own terms in direct opposition to the state and all those who want what he has taken by force. Who then is the self-made man and who the stooge? The difference between the criminal and the conventional entrepreneur is that in one case the entrepreneur fits in with the legal system, and one succeeds on his own terms. When the average person could start a farm or business with the capital available to the average person, the idea of the self-made man made a lot of sense. But as the economy developed, the opportunities may not have been reduced numerically speaking, but the requirements were such that in a practical sense, the average person had little choice but to enter into employment. However, many entrepreneurs noticed that with the increase in portable wealth, crime was a field that required little capital and a skill set available to the average person. But this was not a solution adoptable by all. Not everyone is willing to break the law. If too many people are involved in crime, no one will be creating things to steal. But there's a third field of opportunity that became available to the average man, who did not wish to work outside of the regulatory apparatus of the state. This is the field of public service. Even an average person can take up public service or alternatively go into the supply side of government. If one did not want to commit crimes or serve the public, and had no capital to start a business, he or she could adopt the persona of a victim. Governments need victims. There is a high demand for them. When it was easy to be a self-made person, the need for the state was limited. As opportunities were lost to the less than average person, he or she could play the role victim. Governments need people who have given up to give them problems to solve. We must not disparage this group of entrepreneurs. There are very successful people who have adopted the occupation of victim. However, in America, a lot of stigma and negative stereotyping is attached to the recipient of welfare. People who have fallen on hard times are often treated as pariahs. There is in America a group of people who got in on the ground floor of the American dream and are enjoying the best America has to offer. There's another group of equally motivated persons who find the conventional route to riches largely blocked by the early arrivals. This group has turned to crime or some form of begging. But real success is always rare, regardless of the path one takes and the work one puts into succeeding. There is a lot of frustration in America. Americans grow up with the American dream. They feel they are entitled to it. Yet it is a dream reserved for the few. The larger population see every route to the dream blocked. Most lack the skill sets, capital, or family connections needed to get a foot on the path. The only thing left to the outlier is crime, victimhood, or public service. People, especially black people it seems, are frustrated and angry. The American dream is visible but out of reach. One can list the pathways of blacks as sports, music, crime, and victimization. The system is against them, not specifically because they are black. They are poor because they are, economically speaking, late arrivals. We have been speaking in generalities. 3 specific issues will now be touched on. These are mass shootings, the drug problem, and mass migrations. We shall look at the consequences when the myth of the American dream hits the brick wall of American reality. The mass shooting and the drug trade represent the frustration of a dream-crushing reality. Shootings are fueled by psychotic rage at the system. Criminals are motivated by a determination to claim the dream regardless of the cost. Mass shooters have given up and live only to express their anger and rage at their own limitations. In killing others, they kill their own alter ego. The American dream still holds a magnetic sway on many peoples. Unfortunately, too many do not recoil at the idea of using guns to propel themselves upwards. This is especially true regarding the drug trade. The drug trade is not inherently violent. The violence comes from desperate men who see no other way out. If they cannot make money selling drugs, they may as well be dead, for no other avenue is open to them. But there is still one feature we have not addressed. The thing we have not mentioned is the success of America. The wealth of America makes it seem as if the ladder to success is still there to climb. When migrants arrive on the American shore, the wealth is there, but the paths to it are no longer visible. This is a problem, but coupled with the frustration many born in America feel, it becomes a disaster. Great national wealth coupled with widespread frustration is a bad combination, but it offers success to those in the drug trade. The peculiarly American problem is complex. It is peculiarly American because America is a country with unparalleled promise burdened by a system that is no longer able to satisfy the demand. Like a business that has guaranteed more than it can deliver. America, for all of its successes, has created a lot of angry customers.